tweaked and made clearer, then I think that helps. But also not just make clear, but also publicize to the development community at large and elected officials and economic development folks and the like, that is helpful and that helps them in trying to attract the kinds of businesses you want to have in your community.
Remember the discussion we had some years ago, site plan. Remember the auto parts, an accessories place, Farmington Avenue that is now, that is, I forget what they call it, I forget what the name is.
No, what is something?
No.
Advanced Auto Parts?
Advance, I think.
No.
I think that's it.
Which one?
What's across from Hollywood?
Oh,
AutoZone.
That's AutoZone.
Remember the discussion about how the building looks
Right.
versus the character? Then we had to end this time trying to communicate and have them receive the same message.
Yeah.
And they had a boilerplate,
That's right.
which
Black
permission wouldn't do it.
Yep.
Right.
I know they got an image, very easy to do from that end. But then there comes this issue about, well, how do we delicately keep the business, but tell them, well, maybe we need to do this, that's and so.
Right, and that speaks to the question in part of the community character, and part of it is the aesthetic character. I know I'm getting ahead a little bit, but you don't have to look very far to see other communities that say we have a certain standard. We don't want every building to look like a colonial building. I mean, we know there are towns that do that, but that there's a certain aesthetic that they want to see maintained, and that, again, in the absence of having a clearly defined vision of the physical and economic component of the community, it's what you get is this is boilerplate A, and this is what we give you. And you go, because this is, well, we want to have development in town and we don't want to drive people away, we'll take development plan A, even though it's not a great design. And you go, one town over, 5 towns over, and you go, well, it's the same company. That building looks completely different. Well, that community has established a standard, an aesthetic, a character that it wants to try to promote, and it's much harder to do that when that's not well, let me cast it in a more positive light. It's easier to do that when you have a defined vision that everyone has bought into. And it's not to discourage businesses who want to have you come here, but there's an aesthetic, there's issues of, all the issues that go into development we want, need to be articulated as part of that vision.
And I think we can, because I'm looking at your current plan, and I'm actually not seeing a map in the economic development section that talks about what we think our vision is for these areas. So as part of the new plan, if we can take our business zones and describe them about what we think we're saying right now for the character, you guys can look at it and say, well, no, maybe that's not the vision of what we want it to be. So right now we have industrial zones, we have commercial zones, and certain depths and everything else. And if we can recharacterize this and saying, look, here's the type of uses or the anchors we want to have in different areas and the other types of uses that we want to try to promote, we might be able to give some guidance. Because right now in the current plan, there's really nothing to say what we want. So let's start with that and see where that leads us. I think what Alan was just saying is probably a good segue into the second section here on page 15, which has to do with community character. This is, the topic which got the second highest number of planning points. And people were talking about the fact that community character was important to them, that they did feel that a lot of people were aware of the character, the assets that Bristol really has. Their perception is that Bristol's all about Route 6 or Route 72 or whatever. And so they were talking about improving the character of business areas and promoting our character overall, and the verb was to enhance community character. Any thoughts or reactions based on that input from the people at the meeting?
Just going back to that business development, where it says maybe Bristol should use special development districts like West Hartford. What is what does West Hartford do?
West Hartford has an interesting approach for a number of sort of special areas, I would call them. So a special development district is a different type of zoning approach. What Bristol tends to do today is we have a zoning district, and then we either allow a use by a site plan approval or by a special permit. And West Hartford uses this special development district approach, which is really a zone change process to approve a development. So it's almost the way they use it, kind of a joker's wild card, okay? So that they will allow somebody to come along and propose a process that is approved by them through a zone change. So if you were an applicant and you applied to the board, and they liked your application, they would approve you as SDD number 1. And what you had proposed would be the zone. What this does, it gives the community the maximum amount of detail on a plan, because it's really a final site plan at that level of detail. But you approve it through a zone change process. So if there's anything you don't like about it, you can just say no. Whereas if it's approved by a site plan or a special permit process, you can get into an arguing match as to whether or not that's sort of permitted. So there are a number of situations where, again, it gives the community the maximum amount of control, and it also provides quite a bit of flexibility. And in these days of what we call sort of smart growth or responsible growth, we write a change to a zoning district that may affect hundreds of acres along Route 6. And we didn't mean to do that. We were thinking there was this one site or this one section of Route 6 with this concept would work really, really well. But if we just change it to the entire zone, we can create a lot of other difficulties. So it's a very sort of specialized tool, and I think the woman who was at the meeting that night who testified to this has experience with it, and she likes that process. And I think it's something that we should put into our toolbox and think about, but it may or may not prove to be fruitful for us in all those locations.
Isn't the downtown already designated as an economic development zone by the state through the CCRPA? Didn't they already get approved for?
I believe that's the case.
I think it was on the CCRPA's landing page. We got approved as an economic development region.
I think there's a blank.
Enterprise.
Yeah, I believe there's an enterprise zone that covers downtown Bristol and beyond.
Okay.
I think that's through, I want to say it's through the state one.
The ECD?
I think.
Thank you.
A couple of things real quick on West Hartford. Is West Hartford a special act?
They are, but there's more, but after the Campion case in New Haven, and New Haven was a special act community as well, the conclusion has been that this is no different than a floating zone.
Right.
So that any community can do it.
Right. But I think it's probably worthy of further discussion, but there are some differences. In West Hartford is pretty much built out.
Yeah.
It's had, I think it's been pretty savvy about planning since probably the late 40s, early 50s. So I think they have a much longer history with this kind of with dealing with development. Excuse me. Also, if I'm not mistaken, the town council is the zoning authority. So there's some differences. Doesn't mean it's not worthy of pursuit, but it's not completely an apples-to-apples comparison.
No, and I think that it would seem to me that could be an effective tool for something like Renaissance. Because it essentially gives the community complete control over all aspects of the development, both rightly or wrongly, but it gives the community the maximum amount of control. And it's hard to write a zoning district for a lot of the different activities that they might want to do.
We did do some of that for downtown.
We did.
Change all the
Yeah, I mean,
some stuff was done there for the first time, I think.
yeah, I mean, I think floating zones and special development districts are a good tool, but I think they can be very tricky.
They can, I mean,
I think
Doesn't it amount to spot zoning?
it does, if you choose to characterize it in that way. But in a sense, it's a zone change. So you get to specify that level of detail on a small site. So an incentive housing zone is a spot zone as well. But the state has said in this type of situation, if you were to apply a special development district on a quarter-acre site, I would probably caution you not to do that. If you were, on the other hand, moving in a mixed-use area, something on Route 6 that you wanted to try to create a particular corner in a unique way, but you didn't want to proliferate in all directions in different zoning districts, how do you do that? And this type of approach is what other communities have done, and I'm comfortable with its use, provided you're careful about how you do it. Anything else on page 15?
I just have a concern with calling Bristol a sports-oriented community. I understand that ESPN is here and Giamatti Little League, but I just don't want to alienate the other part of the population that isn't into sports.
Yeah, and I wouldn't think, again, just because it's here on the written page, it doesn't mean that it becomes part of our plan. It's just comments that were raised. And I think figuring out what our brand is probably something that's important for us overall. Okay, on page 16, the next issue in terms of planning points was other transportation, and this included walking, biking, and bus. People talked at the meeting about they wish that better transit service was available, that more walking opportunities were available. Biking was a little bit sort of iffier, but again, it was raised at the meeting as an issue for people to think about. And the verb of choice was to encourage walking, biking, and transit. Any thoughts? The other topic that was raised was the issue of open space. That was the one that got the fourth most planning points. People spoke very strongly about why they felt open space was important for the future of the community. The interesting thing for me at the meeting was that people had a hard time coming up with a verb. And so I think a lot of this really has to do with how we define open space, what it is for us, as to what that verb should be. Some of the words that were thrown out at the meeting were like define open space, improve open space, secure open space, or maintain open space. And I'm not sure that either one of those to me really sort of captures what I think could be a positive strategic direction for this city overall. Maybe it should be, preserve open space, or obtain open space, or some other type of action verb that way.
I think preserve would be part of it.
And I think that
Because it already is.
as I go through your current plan and I look at the chapter right now, which is Parks, Recreation, and the Environment, I think is what it's called, Parks. Thank you very much.
Parks and recreation, open space, and the environment.
There you go. So we've grouped a lot of different thoughts in there, and I think when you actually break it out into what I think is probably my recommendation for discussion is going to be three different topics, one of which is parks and recreation, another which is open space, and another which is the environment. I think the actual verb, which I think is embodied in your current plan, is this concept of preserving these open spaces. I think preserve could be the verb of choice as we move forward.
How do you see preserve different from maintain?
Maintain, to me, is keep what we've got. Preserve, to me, implies a level of activity that we're going to seek opportunities to acquire more open space to add into our inventory. And so maintain is sort of status quo, we're good. And preserve, to me, maybe that's interesting. I view it.
That's funny because to me, preserve is hold on to what we have.
Maintain. How about acquire?
But Yeah. But, other than just hold on to it and look at it and see if you ain't gonna hit this, you can't come over here. You do have to maintain it somehow.
Yep.
Then also acquire. So I don't mean for it to be stopped or static or anything.
I think Gary wanted to ride his mountain bike through, and Marie just wanted to sit and look at it.
That was the issue. The open space, most of the open space now doesn't have adequate trails for
Access.
and recreational use, and Marie's point was, and that's the way it should be.
Haven't we used?
Well, you know,
But haven't we-
I'm paraphrasing, but I believe that's what she meant.
Because it has an open, we could define open space as active, recreational, or passive.
Right.
Either way, I mean.
Well, I think the way Glenn mentioned, I think the 2000 Plan of Conservation Development kind of lumps it all together. And if you look at the inventory that's in here, you'll see there's, land that's identified as parks, active recreation. There's land that's identified as passive recreation, like the hoppers. And then there are pieces of open space that basically, I don't want to say do nothing. They sit in their natural state. There are no trails on them. They're not even walking trails. There's no ball fields. They're just wooded areas or fields. I mean, to some extent, you might argue that Nelson's Field is open space. That there are no. I mean, people sled on it and walk on it and fly kites, but it doesn't have ball fields. It doesn't have trails. It's in some sense open space in kind of its purest form. It's there, and it serves that function of being there and providing some amount of natural conditions in an area that's otherwise developed with houses and roads.
And there might be three categories we get to. There might be what people would call preserves, which could be a wildlife preserve. And then there's passive open space, which is there's no real major activities going on. It's unstructured space, people can do what they want. And then there's active open space, which is, bike trails or other things like that are on there. So it's not really a park. And we also end up with situations, too, where open space can be public or private. I mean, you think about all the land that's owned by lake compounds, which goes up the side of the hill, right? Most of that land, what is that? And to me, it contributes to the character of Bristol because it's undeveloped land, it's trees, etc. So it's open space in a sense, until I go put a roller coaster, I suppose, right, or something. But
it's not necessarily preserved.
It's not, and I think that this is actually the dialogue. There are some significant parts of Bristol, when you really look at the distribution of lots on the map, that have not been subdivided. And you say to yourself, well, why not? And the answer is, because the environmental constraints and the ownership patterns would constrain development there. And those areas contribute to the character of the community. So where do we talk about those areas in the plan? Is it open space? Is it community character? I mean, I don't know yet.
Didn't we talk about that with Mountain?
Well, yeah, he did. I mean, one of the recommendations in this was to discourage development on South Mountain, and try to preserve as much of it as possible.
Moving on, page 17, there were two topics on this page. The first of which was community structure. And I realized I carried the wrong goal over there in the sidebar on the page 17, so that's not right. I'll have to go back and check my notes on that. That's a typo on mine. So over here on the sidebar it says, it says promote business development. I'll fix that. But in terms of community structure, you may recall, Alan, I think, or was it Bob, went back and read the box, listed what that box was. That box was about downtown and about villages and nodes, and people said they wanted a stronger downtown in Bristol. The issue again about the use of taxpayer funds at Depot Square sort of came up. But people felt that this concept of structure was something that could be important for us in the plan moving forward. And then at the end, we just sort of threw it up for open discussion, and the topics that were raised by the people in attendance that night had to do with housing and providing housing options for a lot of different people on the whole housing ladder, keeping and attracting seniors, and empty nesters and other people like that as being part of our goals for the plan as well. Any thoughts or comments in terms of the information on this page?
It's kind of interesting that someone commented about how can we keep and attract seniors. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but my suspicion is that what you perhaps need to attract more than seniors are younger people who they say they want to become seniors.
Yeah, they sit in place for a while and just wait.
I'm not sure where that came from, but obviously someone.
Maybe a senior concern.
Well, but they're already here.
They want to attract others.
And I guess the question is, what is, obviously the population in Bristol, like everywhere else, is aging, but the challenge is not to bring in more aging people, but it seems to me, bringing more younger people who will want it or attracted to live here and then want to stay here and have families and have their kids live here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's the bigger challenge.
Right. And volunteer for boards and commissions and
whatever people do.
And then become senior even quicker.
I can tell you, my profession, this year, I had more people tell me that, when the kids get out of the house, get out of college, they're just moving down south because Connecticut has high taxes, and a lot of them want to go to Tennessee, Florida, North Carolina, and it's like, and the main reason because of the tax base.
Mm-hmm. Are there any statistics wrong about people who do that and turn around and come back?
Mm.
How much more of them do that than I think?
Well, I think one of the things that's happening,
Other side.
I think one of the things that's happening, and I think it's just part of a larger movement that we've seen in the planning literature in the last 3 to 5 years, is that empty nesters, you think about it, it's baby boomers, but empty nesters are not moving in the numbers they used to places like retirement communities. They're moving to communities, very often have a college there, because these are people who are still active. They want entertainment. They want art. They want what colleges have to offer. They're not necessarily going back to college, but colleges attract younger people. There's more stuff to do. There are more activities. There's more physical activities. More cultural activities, and places that 20, 30 years ago you'd never think people would move to. They're moving to. Well, we don't have that benefit here, so that kind of brings it back to the question of, who are you trying to attract to your community? Who are you trying to get to stay here? And what are the things that will bring them here and keep them here? And that's really the challenge, because you don't have a college.
And you're not going to have a college.
Or you don't have the kinds, what that generation is attracted to. And as their kids are looking for places to live, they're being attracted to the same kinds of places. So I think that kind of starts to define the challenge that you have in terms of what's Bristol's future.
I think also, just anecdotally, Bristol has always been a working class, blue collar, identified itself as a working class, blue collar kind of city. That with the transitions that are happening globally, manufacturing, and has really affected this population, and has affected the next generation coming along also. These are folks that would work in a shop for 25 or 30 or 40 years, and that would be their only job. They retire, maybe have a small pension. Those jobs are gone the way of the dodo bird. They're gone. And I think I think the global impact of the changes in the way we do business and manufacturing has really affected the city. And this is a conversation we probably have at least once a week.
It also gets back to the old one industry, one business town
Right.
surrounded by it.
Mhm.
And then little by little, things change.
Right.
Now, things will change again.
Mhm.
So the trick is,
To see that
don't
change
change,
coming,
yeah.
to get on the train while it's leaving the station, yeah.
There's not one answer. I mean,
There isn't.
it's-
I think it all comes back to education, though.
I think it as a, and again, I don't want to, it's certainly not a comparable community, but I think there's a lesson to be learned. And how familiar any of you are with Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio, Glenn may be familiar with this story. Youngstown, Ohio was a steel community. A lot of big steel mills, very good wages, blue collar, solid middle class community. And over the last, since the steel mills have shut down and moved out, Youngstown, the population of Youngstown has actually decreased in the last 20 years, 30 years. And it's stabilized. But whole areas of the city, not unlike Detroit, but certainly not to the degree that a city like Detroit's experienced, but abandoned houses, place starting to run down, kind of in a slump. And they took it interesting, when looking at this situation, saying, well, what do we do? They took a very interesting position. And the position they chose not to take was, we're not going to try to do everything we possibly can do to grow, because that's not the reality anymore. Okay? What we want to do is try to be the best community we can be for the people who already live here. How can we make this a better community for the people who live here? And if we can do that, that is going to attract people to our community who otherwise might not come here. Okay? So they actually decided not to call it smart growth. I think they decided to call it like smart preservation.
I heard smart decline.
Smart decline.
Yeah.
But
I heard that.
and it was like, we got to, we're going to stop. We can stop the decline, but we still have people living here. We have tens of thousands of people still living here. What do we do to make their lives, their community, their experience living here a better experience, that they value still living in Youngstown? And if we can do that, and we make it attractive for those people to stay, one of the byproducts is going to be, it's going to make the community attractive for people who like a community like this, that's a stable community, that has values, that has things that people want to do and be part of. And I think, I'm not suggesting that's directly applicable here, but I think it's an interesting object lesson that it isn't always necessarily about, let's grow, what can we do? Clearly want to keep attracting people, but their thrust was, how do we make the lives of the people who live here better? And that's going to have a positive effect in drawing people in. Not how can we attract more people? That'll come. But what can we do to make this a community that the people who are here can feel good about?
Go on, Tom.
I just wanted to ask Ellen, is that the town that they actually shrunk the town? They dismantled the infrastructure and the power on the outskirts of the town?
I know Detroit has done some of that. I'm not sure if Youngstown has. They may have, but that may have actually been part of it. I don't recall, but you may be correct that, again, rather than trying to expand the infrastructure, it was, if there were, and again, I think Detroit's done this, we have sections of the city that are so far gone, they've been abandoned essentially, that the city said, well, we almost, take up the streets, and if it goes back to wild, to nature, that's what happens. Yeah. And so that the city, while the boundaries may not change, the city kind of shrinks, because the services you have to provide, do you want to be providing services way out in the outskirts of the city? If there's like 2 people living out there, well, if there's 2 people living out there, you still got to run water and sewer and have police and fire protection. Whereas if you have sections of the city where, hey, nothing's happening, it's not going to happen, we kind of shrink it back in. Again, I'm pretty sure they've done that. They've looked at that in Detroit and maybe in Youngstown.
I think it was the mayor that like started that with the plan of conservation development like a few decades ago, and it's just starting to starting to actually dismantle the.
So
I think that was the president's pick for economic development.
It may be.
He's nominated.
So it's we may not be looking at anything as dramatic as that, but again, I think their approach to planning and development was a very interesting one. It was in some ways it was very realistic. It was very practical. It's like we got to take care of who's people who are here. If we do that, if we do it the right way, other people are going to show up.
Which is, it really, really makes sense, even though it sounds radical.
Well, I think in the planning and development community, it is kind of a radical idea. And I think in the political world, everybody wants to grow. It's grow, change, or die. Well, they said we want to grow, but we need to stabilize what we have, and the growth will occur, but it'll occur in as a result of a different approach. And people
probably will be growth that they can manage, as opposed to a place that's been discovered.
Yeah.
And everybody knows.
Yeah.
Creates a whole new set of problems.
Sure.
That they weren't ready for.
I don't know if you guys feel like we've made progress, but I feel that over the last 2 months, in terms of meeting with you and the public meeting and having a chance to talk through this booklet tonight, has set the stage for me in terms of where we go from here, and I think that's kind of key. Here's what I think is going to happen for our next meeting, which is in July. I will be preparing... August, I'm sorry. Thank you. Preparing information to start to address plan chapters. The very first part of the plan is the introduction, the history, and the demographic information. I'll be getting that information together for us to talk through. I may also have information organized on the conservation sections of the plan for us to start talking about. The reason I say may is because I do have a week of vacation scheduled, so exactly what happens here in the sequence is going to have to remain to be seen. So that will be our goal for August. Then in September, we're going to kick into the development issues and infrastructure, and then at that point in time, we're going to be actually starting to assemble the draft plan. The process we're going through is to update the plan we've got. So it's basic foundation for where we are, but based on the work so far and our continued discussions, we're going to go ahead and revise that document. The other thing that's going to be going on over the next couple of weeks are interviews. So those yellow cards, if you could give me those before we leave here tonight, take a couple moments to think about people that you think have knowledge and insight about Bristol or the world and the situations that we face that would be useful for me to talk to get kind of background information. Maybe you think they're just the sort of smartest person in the world, or somebody who's just, always had sort of great insight or perspective. So I may not get to everybody, but knowing that these recommendations came from you would be useful for me, and I can identify people to talk to. And by talking to these people, I think it'll allow me to get ideas to do a better job for you also.
Glenn, I have a question about that. Do you see the names that you want from the commission, sort of not the usual suspects, not the people that we presume you'd be talking to, like the head of the Chamber of Commerce or the local good government?
I may not be able to interview everybody. So if somebody's name shows up on multiple lists, I'll say that's the person I really want to talk to. So just put down names of people that you think can really give me unique insight and perspective. And if you can't think of names, don't worry about it. I'll come up with names too, because I ask everybody I talk to give me the names of 1 or 2 other people as well. But if there are people that you think I'd like to get those done in the next month or 2. After that, the plan's pretty much kind of set, in motion, so they're not going to have as much influence on the process. So the next month or 2 is a great time. Any other thoughts as we go off in terms of issues in the planning process or anything else for us to be thinking about as we go forward?
I have a question, if I can, Mr. Chairman, if I can ask it. It relates to this, actually. Based on your experience doing this in other communities, especially across Connecticut, are you seeing anything here that is inconsistent with the kinds of responses or the kind of feedback that you've gotten in other communities? I don't mean in terms of the issues, but I mean, are you seeing anything here that somehow, gosh, I've never had that kind of experience in 10 other places, or in terms of process and the kinds of observations people are making, that although we may not have done as many people as you're used to out to a, let's say, a community meeting, the kinds of responses that you did get are consistent with the kinds of responses you've gotten from other people you've spoken with? And how does that compare with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think every community is different.
Right.
The mix of uses that happen, I would have to say that sort of individual situations that we've been talking about so far in our discussions, I have had occasion to see before in communities similar to Bristol. But it's the combination or the mix, if you will, that makes Bristol unique, that makes it different than other communities. So I have familiarity with a lot of the issues, but not in this combination. And I think that's what makes this planning process unique. I think the more people that I get a chance to talk to gives me a chance to do a better job with you and for you. And that's why I think these interviews are very important for me. But I do have to say this too. I think your current plan is a good basic document. It's just 14 years old. I think we can make it user-friendly. We can make it more explicit in terms of the types of things we want to encourage. And I think give you, in the city, an effective document moving forward. So I think that, again, we're building off a solid foundation. I think that's important for me from this point forward.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
So our next meeting will be August 6th.
Okay. The motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Happy 4th.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me participate too. It's so much better than talking for a minute and then getting ignored till the next one.
You get to talk for 5 minutes and you get ignored. No,
I'm cut down to 3 now, but
Okay.
I had a little run with 5 for a little while.
If you'd like to. I mean, whatever.
Well, those are all Republicans, I should give you a couple of...
I gotta have that diversity.
This is what I was telling you about, well, not telling you, but
Actually, it's not my term tonight.
I said our plan of conservation development from 2007 to 2017.
Well, I'm sorry.
Where they actually look at the graphics and they assess it. And this isn't the comprehensive report, this is a short report. I don't know why they do it, honestly. It doesn't make any sense. Diversity just happens naturally. It's not something that you have to subsidize or be concerned about one way or the other. It just happens. But it does say that, like a certain minority group will use a certain type of service per se, you know what I mean? So, like,
What city department is in charge of testing?
I can't give you any...
Facts-based statistics.
Yeah, this is, I mean, they use...
We know people that
The reason why they use this actually is because they have to use
I know blue police too.
I'm sure you do.
It's like the federal program.
They don't like me.
I'm sure they should.
Take care, Jody. That's how it is.
When it comes to developing in a regional spot, but then like in this right here, this is actually a new document right here from our NPO, and I got this right off the CCRP website too, it's from the DOT, and they actually say right in there,
Jody's an attorney, so I was thinking about being transparent.
we have to, we recommend the state conducts a Title V assessment of LEP low-income minority populations affected by the redrawing of boundaries. It's all about transportation.
So I got through most of that box today.
That's why there's a direct correlation between...
His response.
People square and what's going on at the state level.
Sit down and just...
I know it's...
I mean, it's a delicate subject.
mean, actually, municipal officials.
The thing is, like, if you have a large segment of the community that feels like they don't have any say, then maybe someone should say, well, we don't have a say.
But these guys,
This is the
plus,
state
how are we gonna
thing.
get back to you guys?
Instead of trying to, like,
Then we gotta get everybody on
be
that.
insistent
And
that
you know what, it's-
I got some movers and shakers on my
there's,
But I think
He let us know.
outside.
what's going on, and there's people that got corralled, and said, oh, we're gonna
As
do
long as they
state
have
plan.
snorkel up there.
A neighborhood organization, let's start our own advising and all that stuff, but they're actually working within a framework.
Have a nice morning.
So,
Thank you.
some people are oppositional to that, the direction that
That's gonna come from you.
and they start to ask questions, and they don't get answers. That's where
Falls, hang on.
you have problems, if you have, one segment of Bristol is oppositional to it because
I think it has.
answers, how come, this and that. Well, you can't do it from both directions, you know what I'm saying? But, I don't know, I just wasn't sure that was in there.
Guys, it's alive.
Thanks for your time.
All right. Hey, have a nice sport.
You too.